And we're good.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's live stream. Today is going to be a little different because we are doing our critique live stream, and this is something that we do once a season, so summer, spring, winter, fall, and this is the winter one. And pretty much we're going to be taking 9 user images that were submitted in the past week, and actually we had more than 9, so I had to randomly pick, and we got our 9 selected. I took down 3 pages of notes of what I want to talk about, and I'm excited to do this one. This is one of those streams that are always well received by the people that get their feedback, but I think it's important to not only pay attention to your submission, I think it's important to pay attention to the other submissions as well and see if you notice what I'm talking about, if you agree with it, if there's something maybe you don't agree with, and we're just going to kind of be giving each submission about 10 minutes each. So that's roughly the time frame we're looking at. So as we always start these CG Cookie live streams, we usually ask you guys to put where you're watching from, and then Joe will do the shout outs while I finish up the marketing here. All right, take it away, Joe.
All right, let's do this. Nerdy Beauty says hello from South Carolina. Ian Falcon says hello from Canada. Turquoise Punk says hello from Tennessee. I'm looking forward to the stream too. There were some really great drawings in the critique thread, and I agree. There were some pretty good ones that we saw already. Sandra K says hello from Minnesota. Hello, Sandra. Lotus Nevermore says hello again from New Jersey, as always. Welcome back. Benedict says, well, hello from Austria. Renato says hello, Tim and Joe from Italy. Valerie says hello from Switzerland. I am not says hello from over here. EVE says hey everyone, good evening from Germany. Konstantin says hello from Russia. Delega says hey from Norway, can't wait to see this. Carrie says, hello, Tim and Joe. I'm so excited for this stream. Fabian Dornbo says, hello from the Netherlands. And then Turquoise Punk says, for a moment there, it was quiet, so I thought I might have come at the wrong time. Nope, we're on time. Well, yeah.
And actually, it was partially my fault. I didn't create a user or a marketing image this morning because I was so focused on critiquing them with my little notepad here, but I am putting it up right now. So if you usually come from Facebook or Tumblr or DeviantArt, I'm a little late today. I'm sorry about that, but I am fixing it right now. Oops. And about 2 days ago, I'll show you in just a second, I received my Peter Moorbacher prints. And if you know who that is, he does these like really beautiful, almost like angelic, majestic, I don't want to call them creatures, and I don't want to call them, I'll call them forms, and they're quite beautiful. But if you ordered his his Kickstarter for Angelarium, you could also get these posters and his book. I still haven't received the book, funny enough, but I got the posters.
Oh, Gypsy Joe says, hey from Liverpool. That's pretty awesome. Gypsy Joe, do you like soccer or football? J-Mail says, hello from Michigan.
Hello.
And those are all the, oh, and Tigil says, hello from still Belgium, sadly.
Why sadly?
I was like, why is it sad?
Yeah. And I am... There we go. Okay. Okay, now I can start. Let me go get those prints. They're on the floor over here.
I'm trying to think of any announcements. Perspective course is coming out tomorrow, so look forward to that. Deliga says it's always such a joy to see what's in the room, what's in the rooms you two are in. Nice poster. Are you talking about these by James Gio, which are signed because he's awesome? This is a Wolverine poster.
I'm like just double checking the links, making sure I posted the right ones.
All of a sudden we get like 10 users in the hangout.
Yeah. Okay, no, I think we're good. All right, so here are the images that I was talking about. This is one of my favorites from Peter. They're wonderful. I don't think I can say anything that is like critiquing them. I think they're very beautiful. I think the compositions are well done. The contrasts are amazing. His use of color is wonderful. So if he is an artist, what?
Can you hold it up for longer? Because it's like kind of blurry.
If you don't know who Peter Moorbacher is, just check him out or just type in Angelarium on Google image search and you will see all the angels that he has. And they're quite beautiful. All right, I don't want to delay anymore because I know we have a lot to do. So sorry about that little mishap with the marketing image there. All right, I think we're just going to jump right into it. Let me see.
All right, just when you start going, I'll hit the timer and we'll go.
Okay. All right, let me do the official introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CG Cookie Wednesday live stream for the concept side. I'm Tim Von Rieden, and I'm joined by Joe Chico.
Hi.
And today we are doing the live user critiques, user submitted critiques, I should say. I'm not critiquing people. And we have 9 of them. We're going to be spending about 10 minutes on each. And that is our goal. So I'm going to jump right into it so that we don't waste any more time. So we're actually going to go till, if you're Central Time, it's 3:40, but an hour and a half from now. All right. So let me switch my screen over so you can see which one I'm working on. All right. So this one was submitted from Owen. It's the gummy bear. And it's part of the candy exercise we did 2 years ago. And the questions that he had there, or that he included with his image was, does the glow and shadow work together? And is the color placement right? So here's what I see almost right away. I took down my basic notes where my initial thoughts, and then after I looked at it for a while, what I was thinking. So my initial thoughts were the edge needs to be cleaner. That was the initial one, and that the highlights weren't present. So to kind of edit this here, I'm going to go ahead and use the chalk brush. And I think I'm going to use the chalk brush for most of the edits that we're going to do here. And then, Joe, could you give me a 5-minute warning when we hit that?
Yeah, of course.
Or maybe like a 2?
Yeah, 5 and 2.
Yeah, 5 and 2. So when doing a real-life study like this, I always find it much easier to take from the reference the environment around it, because sometimes if you're color picking from that reference, it helps, especially in the shadow area, to have the background or the area that it's resting on be that same color, because a lot of that color will bleed into the area on top of it. That's why I think this bleed doesn't represent as well, is because of this. It's not a completely neutral background. It has like this tint of color to it, and we'll get to that when we do the background. The other thing is the shaping of the gummy bear on the edge. So I would really make sure that when you're creating the edge, really push where you see like the arms and the feet jut out here, and have it be like these crisp edges. So like this is a problem right now. I'm gonna go ahead and take my red and just create a nice smooth edge here. Now remember that, let me turn off my paneling, there we go. All right, so when I'm doing this, I'm not focusing so much on the highlights that are if I'm drawing over them. I'm not caring if this is even like a solid red at this point. I'm focusing on the edge and creating a nice foundation first so that we can go ahead and build upon it later. So I'm gonna take this white, bring it around here. And there will be even areas where I cut in. So like right here, I cut too far in, but that's because I can just take my red then and create and just like lay my brush stroke down on either side. And then we create this really nice sharp point right there. And when dealing with realism, you have to be very careful with your edges because in life, there aren't really true line art. So it pretty much is like where one form ends is where the background begins. It's not like separated by a line. So you got to be very careful when looking at that too. Now, for these critiques, I'm going to try to work a little fast since we have 10 of them. So it's not going to be a perfect render, but I'm going to try to get as much done as I can in 10 minutes and explain what I think are the major points of what I want you to look for if you're going to try and fix this on your own time. You're right. All right, so now if I turn that layer on and off, you can already see how much more confident that edge line is, where before it has like this wavy feel to it, but we really want to crisp it up, especially when you're doing something realism like this. The other things I wrote down were, where did I? Oh, the color placements that you had, that was the other question you had. I thought they were all right. I thought that you placed them well, especially considering, I mean, it was working with a reference, but even still, I think people can still mess up placement of colors even when they're using reference. So a one-to-one like this is a little easier, but I just want the color placements, especially since like the glow area was condensed on the bottom. It's very heavy in saturation on the bottom, and I think that was good that you noted that and you did that in the piece. So for the shadow area, this is gonna be a little tougher because I almost wish you would have started with that background. Actually, I know where you picked up that color for the background. You chose like right here, and that like right, where is it? Like right here. Yes. And this you chose, there we go. This is pretty much the background color. So when you're choosing a background color, I would go more light just because, or in this kind of a study, just because the shadow is so isolated and there's so much focus on it that it's easier to start with a lighter background and then add it in. Now in this case, I'm gonna just do like some color picking here and lay in the shadow.
5 minutes.
But the other thing that's really important here is the shadow itself corresponds to the shape of the object that's casting the shadow. So in this case, what you were doing, it was just like this soft shadow that didn't really imply any forms or shape of the gummy bear itself. And if you look at the reference, you can see how it like has this mountain peaking going on, and you want to try to capture that when you're doing your own. And then the glow will fall into the shadow here. And it's pretty heavy. Something like this that's so translucent is going to have a lot of the color passed down into the shadow. Now, be very focused on where the shadow meets the object itself. I think there should be a clear defined line, and you can see it here where it's like very, very saturated and it's lighter in value on the object. And then as soon as the shadow starts, it is that darker value red. And you want to represent that. Otherwise, it gets too blended into each other, and then it becomes hard to separate the form from the shadow. Now, the farther away the shadow is from the object, the less saturated that red will be. You can definitely see that in this example image here. And I think that's why this was such a great example to use as a study, because you can really see not only the color passing in the shadow, but like subsurface scattering as well. Now, the one other part of the shadow before I move on to the highlight is try to make sure that the shadow really connects right up until the edge of the object. So in this one, it kind of stops right here when it should go all the way to the edge of the bear. And you can see it here as well. It doesn't begin right here because light's able to pass under since that leg is curved. But then as soon as that object rests upon the surface, that's where the shadow should really begin. Have I not really hit 5 minutes yet?
Oh, did you not hear me call it? I
Oh,
called
Joe,
out
you're
5
muted.
minutes. Oh no, I unmuted myself and I called out 5.
Your mic just went wonky on me.
Oh, was it
I heard
there a
maybe a
delay or
sentence of
something?
that. Oh, now I can kind of hear you. How much time do I have? Now that I was like, oh man, I'm making great time here.
You just hit the 2-minute mark.
Okay, so then yeah, I'm gonna move on to the highlight then. But the important thing was pushing that shadow up against to the object itself. Now, the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a new layer here. I'm gonna start adding in the highlight. So I'm gonna try to grab the lightest red in this highlight on the bear. Now, when I did this gummy bear, I remember I had the bear as its own layer, so I was able to mask it out. But here it's gonna be a little harder. Now, I'm gonna push this highlight right up against to where it's sliding down the arm here. And then I'm gonna use my eraser tool. I'm gonna make my eraser the chalk brush as well. And I'm gonna follow that edge so that it's really crisp right against that leg there. And it really gives the impression that this light went up the arm. Then I would do the same on the belly here. It wouldn't be as strong, but I'm wrapping it around the leg. Like that. Now I know we're almost out of time. So if you take that same level of concentration and push it around the rest of the gummy bear, that is pretty much the main things that I want you to at least try and experiment when, or at least I hope you try to imply this onto your bear. So these were the before and after shots. Now, like I said, don't rush it though. I feel like I might have rushed it a little bit in areas. And even the highlights, I wanna actually pump them up just a touch with a lighter color. But that will be kind of my challenge for you, is to try to go back and focus on those things that we worked on. All right, okay, I hear
you. All right, that's time.
All right, so we are going to move on to the second one here. Put it on. Okay, so this one is called, or it didn't have a name, I called it Touching Ghost by Kari Sada. And the questions that they had was, does it look like smoke? Is it too overboard with the folds that are going on here? And is the lighting consistent? Okay, so when I open this, immediately my first thought is the lights don't match. The scene is confusing because if this is a night scene, and I'm assuming that's what's supposed to be implied with this kind of starry night going on in the background, why is this figure in the foreground so heavily lit? But it's not like a spotlight lit, it's like a soft lighting. So it almost doesn't make sense, because then if it was this soft light and it's that bright where we can see everything on the character, we probably wouldn't even be able to see the stars in the background because of that visual contrast. So my initial thoughts, and actually, you know what, before I darken it, the other things were, for the color selections, I felt like, let me make a new layer. Especially with like the blue, it felt very, here's blue, and then I'm adding white, and then I'm adding black, and that's how I got my colors. And I feel like that was represented everywhere. And I want you to try to stay away from doing that. Like, try to incorporate more hue and saturation shifting as well, because this color palette is very bland. And even actually the skin, I think, was the one that caught my attention the most, especially on the hand, because the color selection just felt very, very uninspired. And I think you can take different colors and start incorporating them to create more of a warm or more of a cool color palette. Because right now I feel like it's neither. I did like what you started doing on the skin up here with like the rosy cheek, but then it was never incorporated anywhere else. And even this rose color, which I think you could amp up a bit, could like be displayed on the knuckles to add some more flesh tones to the skin. And this is just something that I would experiment with. I think you're in a great spot where you have a great base to do this on. It's now taking the time to experiment. So I'm going to put these to the side here. The question of, does it look like smoke? For me personally, it does not. This feels more like a draped silk or like melting silver. And I think when you do smoke, a lot of it has to do with the translucency. So this is so heavy, it feels like a solid form. But then when you look at the hand down here, this feels more like smoke because you can see the background, you know, through the smoke going on here. And even the dress itself can be seen through the hand. But here it becomes a lot harder because it feels like a solid form. And I'm not sure if that was the intention, but if you really wanted it to look like smoke, I would play more with having the translucency and having the background be seen through it more. Okay, I wrote down the head feels just a touch too large, and the hair, I think you did a great start because you're shaping it out. I like that you're breaking down the hair in shape patterns. From here, it's now really working it further and pushing it so that you have more of these individual strands, and it doesn't look like a shape. Because right now, this doesn't feel like hair to me. That feels more like a coffee bean or something that doesn't represent hair. And the shading is a bit of that reason why. Like if you broke it up just a touch more, I think it would read as hair. Even just something like that where you break it up to imply that there's different strands going on while still keeping the shape. For the folds that you have in here, I don't think you went overboard with the folds. I just think they're placed incorrectly. And especially with like the bottom folds here, when you have a fabric, and I'm assuming this is just a typical dress, when you have it pulled to the center of the waist and you have a band that's scrunching the fabric into one area, you're going to have like pockets of wrinkles and folds on the edging of that. And then it would be almost like straight down. Now, it really, really depends on the fabric that you're using and how tight it's being pulled. Because sometimes you could get it more flat. Like you can have it where it's like cut in that way. But I already feel like the look that you're going for is it's this thicker, more loose fabric, and that would get more of these wrinkles. And then here, all these wrinkles are in the same direction. And that doesn't really make sense. And this is like a great area for you to have fun with playing with wrinkles and creating more interesting shapes. Because right now I can't really tell like what forms are going on underneath. This pulling of the fabric implies that she's twisting quite heavily, but based on her pose, it doesn't seem like she's actually twisting that hard.
5 minutes.
And then the last thing I wrote was the stars for me are distracting. I think you have like 3 techniques of the brush going on here. Like this one, I can tell, let me zoom in, is like a star brush, but then it feels like it's getting warped here and then pulling in these different colors and then really warping it in some areas, I think creates this clash of what the stars actually look like. I would keep it consistent with either 1 or maybe 2, but having so much of these different patterns and like stretching and pulling of it, I don't think works well here. So if I was to take this image and make it my own, the first thing that I would do, I'm going to hide these, is I would darken it. And I would darken it quite a lot. And I would let the smoke almost be like my source of light. Now, mind you, this is going to be really quick. But I feel like we can get some more story and more of a mood that is felt when we work with a dark palette. And then from here, you can work up the lights. So let me grab a new layer. So with the smoke, I think I would have more fun laying in a lighter blue. And I would definitely use reference for this. And I would make some areas darker so that it's like it's being seen through the smoke. Because right now, like what I said, since you can't see through it, it just doesn't read as smoke. And then if his smoke was like the light source, then you can have that be reflected on her. And I think that you might be going through, one of the things that I went through is I didn't really understand local color as much. And it's the idea that like skin is a specific color in your mind, or like this dress is blue, so I have to use the color blue. But like if they were in a setting that wouldn't call, or like had like a heavy light source of yellow, or even if it was like another blue, if it was in that yellow scene, that blue should no longer be blue. It would actually be more of like a green, because that light and the base color are mixing and it's creating a green, but our eyes will still perceive it as blue, because we know that under a yellow condition that the color of the dress will change as well. It won't be that pure blue anymore.
2 minutes.
All right, so I would try to work up this kind of a lighting scenario, but that's just one way of going about doing it. The other way would be explaining this heavy front lit light source. And if this is the case, I would then do away with the stars completely. So I would take these out, because then it looks like they're on like a balcony and they may have stepped out of like a ball or some kind of event where it would be heavily lit from, or the lights would be coming from inside of the building, whatever that might be, like a mansion or a ball, and they are on the balcony and this is what's happening. Because then this would make more sense of why you have such a dark backdrop, but there's such a heavy front light then. And this almost tells me more of a story. So just including like a banister here. Let me, I don't like that color. And like imply columns or something. I think this already tells more of a story, and it makes more sense as to why it would be so heavy backlit with this mix, or sorry, it would be such a heavy background and being so heavily front lit here. All right. So that is this one. Then let me, oops, I'm gonna just keep adding them to this. All right, the third one we have, put it here, is this Pirate Lady by Joseph, or the username was Guava. And the questions that you lay down is the color scheme harmonious? And then it was like 3 separate questions on the hips, the chest, and the face. Now, the first thing I wrote down is, in your description, you said you did an illustration of a character. I would still consider this more concept art. I think just based on the pose and the way that it's colored and drawn, it'd be a more finished concept art, but I would not call this an illustration. The first thing after that I wrote is great color palette. If you were worried about your color palette being harmonious or not, I would say absolutely. These colors are very well, they tell the story well of who this character is. And I know that you wrote down you wanted it to be royal, but still edgy and have kind of a mystery to it. I forgot the word usage exactly, but it was something along those lines. And I think that perfectly suits the colors that you have. These dark purples mixed against, it's almost like a Barney purple, if you know what that is, with these darker colors, and then having gold be your accent, I think works really, really well. And I also want to give you props for experimenting with not only the colors, but on showing the hands. This is something that I think artists don't do a lot. They try to like hide the hands in pockets, behind the back, something where they don't have to draw them. And I give you kudos for trying it. I do think, and it's going to come later on in my critique, but this hand I think needs to be reworked, but I like that you actually put them in the front. Okay, so the area that you were asking about, the hips. Now, it was really hard for me to see where the hip line started and where it ended, because the back of the coat and her legs are so similar. And when you're doing a stylized look like this, you can get away with like having, I'm gonna even pull maybe this blue here. You can get away with like laying in a secondary color like this to show the inside of the cape. And this allows you to separate the forms from another, and it's easier for you to see. And you can even have more fun with this. I would actually put like a small gradient going up. Something like that. And you can see now before and after how it's so much easier to see where the legs begin and end. So this leg in particular just feels very large and almost out of place. I think this foot in particular feels very, very large. I would go ahead and make this more in front. And I think I would actually rework it so that her boot came more like here. I think I like that you're doing stylized and that you're exaggerating proportions. I think you just got to keep it in proportion with the style that you're laying down. And I think having that very sharp angular cut suits this character well. And I think having these strong legs going very angular as well works. So you can see the difference here. I would actually even push in this knee more so it doesn't look broken. What else did I write here? Oh, okay. So that was the one thing. For sure, the back of the jacket I would lighten up or do something where it separates the forms from one another. But the hips don't feel that off. I know that was one thing you asked. The little area that I did do an edit on is I heightened the hip placement. Let me move in here. So this was before, and then I had just curved it out. And this allows the chest to be easily pushed out further and not feel so sunken in. I know you wrote that you were trying to rework the boob here, and it just wasn't working. The one thing I noticed right away was, was this line right here. We see this a lot with cleavage, but you want to be careful how you do that, because then this breast feels very small in comparison to this one just because of that line here. If you take away that line, which is what I did in this example, you can see how it feels much more fuller, and it makes more sense because we wouldn't see that shadow line here. Now with what she's wearing, they're definitely pushed up and together, like very tight. So you would get a very defined breast line here separating the two.
5 minutes.
You wouldn't get so much of a double line here. Now, the other thing that I did, and you may have noticed, was I pushed them out further. And it's not to just make them bigger. If you know who I am, I'm not trying to make boobs bigger just for the sake of making boobs bigger. But they felt sunken in, where if her rib cage was coming out that far, I was trying to picture, and this is something that I was taught in school, is try to picture how the form looks underneath. Now, in this, it may pass because of how tight they're being pressed against the body, but based on the volume that we're trying to add here and the way that they actually come off of the chest, you don't want to make them look sunken in, because this implies depth, but that would also imply that they're like being caved in, or like the chest itself is, like the rib cage isn't there. So I pushed it out further so that we have this line, this line here, so that we would know that they would end here, and that's where the chest would begin. Okay, the other things that I wanted to talk about for this one was your level of detail. I really like the button thing that you have going on here, and with like the little slit for the button to slide in, but then it just becomes dashes on that point forward. Now this becomes one of those tough things, because what level of quality are you trying to hit? Because I really like these buttons, and I would like to see them pushed all the way down. Now you can use shortcuts and do some copy and pasting, and that will make it go faster. But I think having these 4 here and then the rest be these lines, I think just shows me that you didn't want to do it. Like there wasn't effort put forward, and I would like to see that, because that would push this to another level if you did that everywhere. Even with like the keys felt very like they were melted into each other. And the belt buckle, like there was no separation of the lock part against the buckle itself. Don't overlook the small details. I feel like honestly with the art that I look at, and whenever I do critiques like this, that's the first thing that I notice and the first thing that will throw me off on a picture. Now, the hand itself, I think, needs to be just reworked, and it's the placement. Because if her arm is going back and then forward, it's like a really weird position to have your arm and hand in. And I would just stand up and try to do the pose yourself. And if it feels like you're really like pushing your arm back and it doesn't feel natural, then it won't look natural when you try to draw it. I would actually try to like pull the arm out to about here, do the same hand thing, and then you can even have more fun with your shape of the sword, because then you're really pushing it out, and then you have more of this pocket shape going on here. And you can see how that just feels more comfortable. Oops. Oh boy, my Photoshop's going crazy. On rogue. Okay, so you can see how it just feels even a little more relaxed. And if this was my concept, I would like really push it out. I would like have it way out here, have the sword come out, have it be like this very long, extravagant pose where she's relaxed, but very, very confident. You can see the difference between before and after, where now she looks like she's ready to fight. Like she can pull that sword out at any moment, where before it feels like a strange resting place, especially for a character that feels more maniacal or more of like I don't want to say a villain, but more of like a straight to the point kind of a chick. The face, I think, oh, that was the other thing with the shadow. Okay, so on the neck, we have these 2 rim lights going on either side. And based on where the lighting is coming from, because if the hair is pushed behind the jacket, then if this was like a side view, the hair would be going back, and then like if here's the jacket, so the hair is being pushed back, so light would be able to travel in this pocket, so we would actually be able to see light on the skin here. And I did that in my paint over, oops, here. You can see before and after, and I got rid of that rim light on the other side. Now I'm all for bounce lighting, but having a rim light on this side does not make any sense, especially if it isn't represented anywhere else in the image. And the hair itself, I would even make darker in here as well. So be very aware of your lighting. If you are going to place a lighting in your scene, just be very aware of where it is coming from and having that be consistent all the way throughout. I'm assuming we're hitting our mark.
Yeah, that's going to be like the 10-second mark.
Okay. So yeah, there was a lot on this one. I really like the base that you have going on here. I would just continue pushing it. Move that arm if you can. And I would separate that jacket and maybe move the leg a bit too. But great start. And if you're ever questioning your color palette again, don't, because this was a great color palette for what you had going on here. All right, turning the page. Moving on to the next one. Oh, this one's a fun one. Okay, so this is a warrior, and this was done by Quito, I think is how you pronounce it. And the questions that you had on were about the skin and the sense of direction. Now, for something like this, I love exaggerated proportions like this because I can just imagine shading it. I personally don't do a lot of dynamic stuff like this, so when I see it, I get really excited because then I think about how I can shade it. Now, the shading here, I do find distracting. The first thing I notice is it feels so contrasted where it doesn't need to be. And I forgot what tutorial I watched on DeviantArt, or not watched, but just read through, where I was talking about how for skin tones, you don't need to make it like extreme white for highlight and black for shadow. It actually looks better when you do more of like a a base matte coat and then have your shadows and lighting be more softer. So I did a quick pass like this, and even to get to there, you know what, I'll just do it live for you guys. All right, so I'm just choosing one of the more neutral skin colors here, and I'm gonna do a pass on the skin here, and then I'll just lower the opacity layer. Now, something like this, where it is like this extreme jumping pose and the light is very extreme, you gotta be very aware of your light source, because when you add in a light source, you have to keep it consistent. And in this case, I'll talk about where I kind of see it not be as consistent and how to fix that. Because the shaping is great. I think there might be just a few anatomical errors that I would try to correct. But when you do something so stylized, you can kind of, I don't want to say get away with it, but you can exaggerate it to a point where it still fits the theme and what you're trying to do, but you still want things to make sense even in that exaggeration. Do it on the face. And I love that you're experimenting with color too. All right, so I'm just gonna turn that layer down. And I'm gonna do the same for the pants. Now on the pants, I actually like having a bit more of that contrast. I think it fits the material better, but for skin, I think it needs to be lightened up, or else it reads very strange. It doesn't read like skin to me as much. All right, so before and after, you can just see how from here, then we could push on our lights and shadows, and it doesn't have to be black or it doesn't have to be white. We can work with our colors to then create the forms. I'm trying to think of if I want to do, oh yeah, first, okay, so the braid is the one other thing that kind of threw me off, but before I get to that, I'll talk about the lighting scenario that we have going on here. So based on the way that the light is placed on this character, I can tell that it's coming somewhat from this side, but it's confusing because on the hand, it implies it's like here, but then on the chest area, it's saying that the shadow from the arm is falling on the body itself. But it doesn't really make sense if it's more overhead here, because if we can still see the light on here, then this part of the arm's not blocking it. So it's actually more overhead. Let me see if I can draw like an arrow. And like slightly to the side. But then you see, and then like on this arm here though, it doesn't make sense because it's like implying that it's coming like this direction. And if it was coming from that direction, then this lighting scenario on the side of the body doesn't work for me. Let me erase these. So when I look at this, I would like think, okay, what is the lighting scenario that's going on here? And what would be the least amount to adjust? I think I would have it more from here and have it coming from behind slightly, because then that works with the hand, and I really like how you shaded the hand. But then we'd have to keep it consistent all the way throughout. So like this area would not receive the light. This would probably just a touch here. But then on the side of the body, this would be receiving that light. Because the arm, the shadow, it wouldn't be falling really on the body as much. It might be a little higher, maybe. But for the most part, this would all be lit. And same with up here. So then an area like this section here would be actually more in shadow. Now we can still show some value shaping to imply the forms of the body, but for the most part, it wouldn't be this like heavy highlight that we're having on the rest of the body. Even like on this ab, on like this side, I should say, of the abs, it doesn't seem to make as much sense. But then having it more heavy on this side does make more sense. Now for the anatomy stuff that I was talking about, I would say this elbow, it feels too fluid of a curve, where I would want to see this be more of like a strong point. Even like that, I feel like would help a touch. And then these, I think I would turn into one. Since we're having such a bulging arm, it feels really weird to see like the individual tension lines of the muscle. And then this area here, if this is supposed to be the bicep, I would have pushed it down further, because right now this feels too connected. And I do like the idea of it being smaller because of it being foreshortened with the perspective that we have going on here. But it still feels, actually maybe like that. Like this should be pulled out more. Okay, I know that I don't have as much time with each of these. So the other two big things that I noticed were the braid and the battle axe itself. The battle axe felt kind of flat, and it was because I see that you have the other side of the axe here, and it's like showing the width of it. But I would increase the lightness, or at least have somewhat of a lighter color, but right up against that darker color, so that you can see the width more. Because right now it's barely visible, and if you edge it out like this, you can see how like immediately it adds some thickness to that battle axe. When I take it on and off, you can see how it goes from kind of flat to having somewhat width. Okay, so now the braid itself. This was the one thing that I think threw me off the most, just because if this was a braid and it was being heavily backlit like this, the shadows and the way it's worked is too much. Because if we have such a light concentration around it, we have such a great amount of bounce light, then this shouldn't be this dark, especially with something like a braid where you should be able to see some of the light pass through on the edge. So let me go ahead. I almost wish I had. Oh, are we hitting it?
It's 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I would, you know what? Maybe I can. I'm going to grab my magic wand tool. I'm going to select the area around it. I'm just going to paint in, inverse it. Paint in the braid here, slightly lighter. Now you can still have some of your dark areas, like where the braids are kind of flapping on themselves, or it's like overlapping itself. And like this might be a touch darker. I'm going to turn the opacity down. And then I would rework the knotting that you had, because the knotting was actually really good. When it comes to braids, I see a lot of badly drawn braids. I think this one was actually a better one. The only thing I would be careful of, let me turn this off, is a braid should never look where it has two of the things on the same side. A braid should be tiered where it looks more like this. Because then this strand of hair would follow here, and this one would follow here. So it's just like a back and forth the entire time. It's not side by side. And then with this hair, made it slightly lighter. And I would probably do the same on the beard. I wouldn't go too much, but then the area that's in the light, I would amp up. Because it doesn't really make sense for it to have such a dark value shading.
About 30 seconds.
Now, granted, when you have more of like a stylized look to your character, you can do things that are like artistic liberties of having a darker line around the edge. I'm just trying to give more tips to, I would say, make the style come alive more and have it feel more accurate. Because then, even if I decided to darken like this area just a touch, because I do think right now it's a bit too flat. So if I just darkened it a touch on some of these muscle areas, I think this could be awesome. And let me see the before, what we've all done here. Before, it feels almost like Dodge and Bernie on the edges, and you don't want that effect. You want it to feel more like a skin tone. Oops. Yeah, something around there. And then I think if you just kept working it up, you could really get a sense of the light and where it's coming from. I want to see if I wrote down. I think, oh, I wrote down overblown. That's the word I was looking for. The skin feels overblown. And when you're doing such strong dynamics like this, you got to make sure your rendering and lighting are consistent and on point. And try to avoid using black for your shadows. All right, that's it. All right, moving on to our next one, a little simpler. We have Oddish here by Daniel May. This is a great one for starting off because I think it's such a focus on value and shape and form. Now with Oddish, it's pretty much, if you don't know what Oddish is, it's a Pokemon. And essentially it's just like a circle with legs, and then it has like leaves coming out of the top of it. And that's Oddish. And then he has this little face of 2 eyes and a mouth. Ta-da. So with this Oddish study, I think you were focusing on the way that the light was interacting with the different forms. And we'll talk about that. But the question that you had were, are the leaves lacking detail and the blend with the shadows? So let's talk about this. So immediately I feel it's too stiff. And this does kind of read as a style version of Oddish. It doesn't feel like a study of it. So like you're pulling your own style into it. And that's why I think this is more tight. And there's like this flat matte rendering to it. And it kind of works, but it clashes with the light source that you're trying to implement down here, where up here it feels like there is no light source. It's just like this flat form separation of color, where down here you can definitely tell the light source is coming from overhead to the side. And we'll talk about how to keep this more tight and clean when you're doing something like this. Now the other thing was, when working with a creature that's not real, it's imaginary, we don't really know what the surface texture is exactly. So we kind of have to decide on that ourselves. For me, it feels like a blueberry, where it's a soft light. It's like treating the lighting in a very soft manner. It's spreading out the light source. And I think that works. I don't know if I would have had it as strong. I think I would have made it something like this, where the highlight isn't quite as on point. And okay, and then we're just gonna keep our shadows consistent. So I'm gonna make a new layer here. And then we'll talk about leaves in the second half. So if I'm gonna use the light source that you have, now the first thing that I'm gonna do is, if it's overhead and in front, I'm gonna try to have the eyes reflect that. I think the eye highlight were too low and to the side. Instead, I'm gonna let me grab a highlight color. I'm gonna try to match in a sphere itself, wherever the highlight placement is on the bulbous sphere. I'm gonna try to match that on the eyeball here. Okay, and then from there, we can have maybe some fun with the facial features. I think with this being more flat, it kind of works, but like if you wanted to push out some of the forms, just a touch, like if you wanted to show some of the lip, it's just barely jutting out and catching some of that light because it's cutting in. Just grab a lighter color and you just place it right against that darker form underneath. You can see how then it creates kind of this illusion that it's being cut in. The tongue, I would place it more in the back so that it feels more angled, because we're not looking at the character straight on. So the mouth should be reflective of that as well. And then try to keep your corners tight, especially with a study like this where it's so simplified that this is kind of your chance to focus on keeping it really clean and doing like a very solid pass on everything. So like keeping corners tight, making sure the lighting is consistent. Because when you're working with such simple forms like this, people aren't going to really be looking at how complex it is, but rather the way that you handled it. I'm going to switch over to my skin brush just because the chalk brush I think is a bit too textured for what I'm trying to create here. Now for our Oddish, there's going to be a terminator line, and that's where the lighting meets the shadow. So in this case, it would probably be somewhere around here. Now, mind you, I'm not taking the leaves into consideration yet, so I'm not worrying about the cast shadow of the leaves. But I am going to have this color come around
5 minutes.
And be pretty consistent until we hit this level, or that terminator level. I'm going to try to do a nice shading pass on this. All right. Actually, see what I mean? Like with something so simple, you really have to be aware of how it's looking render-wise. All right, so then at the terminator is typically where it's actually the darkest. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, but it's because your bounce light will diffuse that shadow value a bit, and it will lighten it just a touch. But typically, I like to start by first placing it all in shadow. Something like this. And then I would grab my lighter color, and I'm not going to press it as hard as I did over here, but then I'm going to have some of that represented here. I'm going to first use the color of the material or the object that we're working on, in this case, Oddish is blue, and then I would pull from the background color and lay some of that in. Now remember, I don't want it to be too heavy because I'm not sure what the material of Oddish is, but I'm assuming it wouldn't be like ultra reflective. It'd be more soft, but it would be, since it's more organic though, I do want it to have somewhat of a property to it. Now this is where personally I like to have a lot of fun. With this foot, this is where we can really showcase our understanding of lighting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this entirely blue, and it's going to be the same matte blue that we used on Oddish for his kind of base up there. Okay, so now if we have this overhead light, think about how this bulbous shape would cast a shadow on his foot and where the light would be able to reach to before the shadow itself would become present in the back of the foot here. Something like that. Then from here, I can grab that highlight color, place it in the same placement that I have done on the eyes and on the bulbous part. Lay it on and then spread it out. And from here, where's the bounce lighting going on? So on his foot, we'd get some. Then oddly enough, the bounce light that is bouncing on the bulbous part would actually bounce back on the foot a touch too. Bounce light is probably one of my favorite things to do to an image, just because well, I guess if you're doing like a realism study, you want to be careful, but you kind of determine how much bounce lighting you want to be seen on your subject matter. And the more that you do it, the more that you're separating out forms and you're really showing your light source and where it's coming from. And that's why I tend to try to do it in everything I do. Okay, so now for this background shadow, this isn't really working for me. And having this consistent, solid shadow color, it's a good base, but then in areas where the shadow is like right under the subject matter itself, it should and needs to be darker. So I'm not using black, but I'm going to use a darker gray here. And right under the foot, it should be pretty dark. And cut back. Then I have to imagine like where that bulbous part of the Oddish would start.
About 30 seconds left.
Oh boy. Okay. So then this I would actually have to get rid of. Oof. This one I might go like a minute over just because I want to talk about the plant for a second.
Yeah. Also, it's 3:05. Just giving you the time.
Okay. So then the shadow itself would be much longer, especially if we're taking in the plant consideration here. But it wouldn't be as dark. It would get lighter as it went further away from the subject matter. But the area just under the foot, and it should be tighter. And when I say that, I mean it should be cleaner. So like the area right up against here, like I can see my skin brush, and it should be more of like a tight shadow. And it kind of diffuses. It gets softer the further away it gets. Now I would do the same with this shadow under this foot. So like this would be more like this. But we'd be able to see more of a lighter gray under this foot. It wouldn't be this dark because the foot is in the air, it's suspended. So all that bounce light would be able to go underneath. Now, before I move on to the next, or you know what, I can show really quick before and after the direction that we're trying to take this guy in. But for the leaves, I kind of like some of the styling going on here, but I would take more of a dynamic approach to the leaves. I just found a quick image on Google, and I would take more of that bloom effect and place it on top of here because these feel so matted and like pressed up against each other that it doesn't, you can't have as much fun rendering it and like showing your cast shadows and really seeing each leaf for the unique properties that it has. So I would try to bloom it out a bit more.
All right. Before you move on from the Oddish,
yeah.
I think the bounce light should be a bit more to the front, right? If the light is coming from that direction, the object's right side should be in the shadow and would have less bounce light on the side and more toward the front. Not in the front, but...
Wait, what? That was too much.
Can you see the questions? I have it selected.
Yes. So we should be able to see more bounce light like here. Like I said, I don't have a crazy amount of time on each, so I can't do a full render. But yes, it would be more on the front as well. Okay. So I'm moving on to digital. I know you've probably been waiting, and yours actually got selected. All right, the first thing I wrote down was wonderful, and this looks like you had fun. I can definitely see some style influence. I feel like I see some lotion here, but from what I've seen you doing previously with your digital art, I really like the direction you're going with. I like how much you're experimenting with color and even style. So the next thing I wrote was be aware of your level of detail. So like right now, the face is very crisp, but then almost the entire rest of it is more of this blurry, quick drawing, which it can work, but I think as a study, if you really want to push this further, I would try to render out some of the other areas as well. And also focus on the fabric folding. I think that was the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing I wrote down was this coat and the way that the arms are coming out of the sleeves here. It doesn't make too much sense. And even though it's stylized, it doesn't fit the style that we're going for in terms of accuracy. I would lower this and I would have that sleeve be more here. Actually, I did do a full, I did a liquefy pass on things that I just moved around a little bit because the other things that I thought were a little strange were the legs, I love that you are allowing them to be seen. I like long legs myself. I think you should have some indication mark that she's wearing something underneath. It kind of looks like she's just wearing a jacket. But for the anatomy of the legs, even with stylized legs, it should still have the look of it being more in proportion. So if you wanted them to be more thin, you can still do that. I made them just a tad thicker on my liquefy pass, but you can see how the knee feels more incorporated on each, where before it almost becomes thinner at the knee, which doesn't make too much sense even in a stylized version. The other thing that I wanted to take note of was the head. It felt a bit like the upper half was really large. And if we take in consideration, let me make a new layer. The hair, so the head would be like something like this. And the eyes, I would heighten up just a touch so that it matches up with like a halfway mark. Because right now it feels so on the top. The forehead is just very big. So if you move up the eyes, or move down the forehead, and I actually moved the eyes a touch to kind of fit. I tried to keep it within your style. I'm not trying to push it toward realism. That wasn't the purpose of it, but I tried to make it feel more in proportion to itself, I guess. And then the other thing you notice is the curves of the fabric that we have here. I tightened them in. And with fabric, think of doing fabric as with gravity. And if there wouldn't be a wave in real life, unless if that wave has a purpose for the style or for the intention of the composition, I wouldn't add it in because this wave feels very strange, especially for the coat that we're trying to create here. So I would straighten it out, and I would have fun really focusing on the folds in the coat. Even like the areas in between the buttons. I can see you like started it here. I would love to see that push further. I just think this piece is such a great experimentation piece. It might have been more quick, and that's probably why this isn't as like focused on how fabric is folding on itself. But I think your next pass on this should be just that and really try to make the coat feel more like a coat. And I would give her some kind of a shorts here. Unless if you were trying to create the illusion that she didn't have pants on or anything on underneath. But those were the big things that I had. Let me read what else I put. Oh, kind of like what we talked about in the pirate one is try not to hide your hands. And I know that this one, it kind of works because if she has this big overcoat and these giant pockets on the front, it kind of fits the mood that we're creating here. But in the future, try not to do this because typically when I see hands in pockets or like a hand behind the back, it just shows me that it's like a scared, like you weren't able to draw the hands, so you hid them. And I don't think that's the case for you because I've seen some of your sketch work, and I think you can. I just think maybe for this composition, it kind of does work. Okay, and then 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I wrote, actually I didn't have too much of a critique on yours, was on the leggings here. Just be careful wherever the skin line would be if they weren't wearing the clothes. Always try to keep the whatever they're wearing thicker than that line. It's like here, just pushing this out a touch makes it feel more like it's wrapped around. And then even like around the leg, I would just push it out just a touch. Like you did it here and even here and here, but on this one, it just felt too flat, especially if this is supposed to be a thicker material. And then down here, I think, once again, it kind of works with the quickness of what you're going here, but I would actually push you to try to take another pass at this and do like another hour, another 2 hours on it, and to see how far you can push it in just those 2 hours. Because I think you have a great base, but then if you just take it, actually, let me make a new layer here. And like just spend your time going throughout and like picking areas that you want to render out further. I think you could really have a solid piece on your hand that showcases and demonstrates how far you've come as an artist. Man, this is weird. This is like the first time I feel like I don't have to talk for like completely without taking breaths or stopping. I'm gonna
Right
actually
on.
just take some time rendering this if you want to ask some questions here.
Yeah, I was like, holy cow, you were just
I was moving through. I had my notes ready. I was gone.
you talked for like an hour straight. All right, time to ask some questions then. JML asks, Tim, do you wonder if people submit your work for critiques just to see what you do with them?
Do what?
Do you wonder if people submit work for critiques just to see what you'll do to them?
uh, I would hope not. I would hope that they would want like genuine feedback on what I believe that they could improve on. Well, I guess yeah, that would be my feedback. So yes. But this is something that I always feel like it's helping. I remember when I was in school, if I could get past my stubbornness of one being critiqued or two like saying what is wrong in my piece, if you can just get past the idea that everything that you create is not perfect 100% of the time, then I feel like this is really where a lot of my growth happened, is when someone was giving me feedback and I was really listening to what they were saying and listening to their explanation of why. And when I took their thoughts and critiques into consideration, it really helped me. I felt like I grew a lot. Even like when I was just asking my friends, I had one friend in particular, her name was Nubia, and she was hypercritical of my work. She never really complimented anything I did while I was in school. And like now we compliment each other more, but when we were in school, it was like a competition. But we would always give each other constructive criticism, and that's so helpful because you can't teach that. You can't learn that. That's something that you receive from another artist who has a different visual eye, and they're scanning your work and giving you their feedback on what they think looks wrong, because you just have to also swallow the pride pill on the idea that you don't know everything and that everything that you do could be better, and it could take another artist's opinion to help you see that.
Nerdy Beauty asks, a random question regarding tablets, ergonomic-wise. Should you work on a tablet at an angle or laying flat on the table? And should the palm of your hand be in contact with the surface while drawing, if that makes sense?
I'm the worst person to ask this because my palm is always on the tablet. I like barely move my hand. It's just it's like my fingers that are moving the pen, but my hand stays pretty steady. So when I put my canvas on my screen, I usually put it in the same place, and I just kind of follow muscle memory at that point. But I think if you talk to most art teachers, they would tell you to keep your hand moving, like you should be drawing with your elbow and your whole arm. For me, that was always so tiring. And I think efficiently as a concept artist, I can't be moving my arm 24/7 to create a piece.
Tigel says, haha, I didn't notice the no pants thing until now. That wasn't on purpose at all. Oops.
It's all good. I mean, it might be like one of those, she might have like super short shorts on, or if like she just woke up and for whatever reason put on the coat before her pants. I'm not sure. But yeah, if you just add like little indication lines, because if you want to show the legs, I'm definitely a fan of like showing long limber legs as well. Then I would just show little indication marks of shorts so that she doesn't look naked then underneath.
That's 10 minutes.
Okay, so this was just my little paint over. So you can see how I'm just matting out the colors a bit more. And if you wanted to add your color experiments on top of that, I think this would feel more of like a solid foundation for you to work upon. Kind of like the hair. It feels so flat, but in a way that is executed with purpose. And I think you could do the same with the coat. And I would love to see that. All right. Gotta flip my page here. Next one we have is Alice Back in Wonderland by Falita, I think. Falita. Something along those lines. And this was something that she said that they spent a lot of time on, and their questions were, Does the tattoo feel like a tattoo? The cloth, was it too thick? Does the hair feel like hair? Are there not enough background elements? All right. So my immediate thought to does the tattoo like a tattoo, unfortunately, is no. I think this feels too crisp and too bold to be a tattoo, and it doesn't feel like ingrained into the skin. What I would do, I would first layer the skin color over it. And then I would turn the opacity down. And then from here, I would work on the values that you placed on the skin over the tattoo. I think this is where people get lost a bit when incorporating tattoos, because like the spinal cord, you can't even see it, but you can see it hinted with a shadow next to the tree, but it should be hinted on the area of the tattoo as well. The best way to do a tattoo is to make it really feel ingrained on top of the skin, not plastered on top like a sticker. And the more that you incorporate more skin hues into it, typically helps it feel more like a tattoo. And having it not be as crisp and sharp on the edge. I know that when you get a fresh tattoo, it will be more crisp, but even a really crisp tattoo, it bleeds just a little bit into the area of skin around it. And that's why it creates this more ingrained effect, because it has more of that bleed into it. So I would incorporate that more. And let's see, so you can see before and after how it feels more a part of the skin rather than placed on top of the skin. And I would just keep focusing on doing more of this. And if you push some of the highlights on top of it where it starts like on the skin and then over bleeds onto the tattoo, I think that would help as well. Like that. All right. Now the second thing was, oh, you asked, is your color palette consistent? Yes, I would say your color palette is consistent. It definitely feels very cool, but then having your pink included, I think, is a nice balance to the rest of the scene, which is more cool. But actually, even the purples have a bit of warmth to them, but as a whole, I feel like they do work together. The question on whether or not the hair looks like hair or not, I would say in areas I think it works, but in other areas I don't think it does. So like right here, I think this loop right here feels the most like skin to me, because you have this balance of contrast where here on this entire shape, having the entire thing be lit like this doesn't work as much for me. So I'm going to pull in some of this lighter pink. And I think having the whites be more isolated helps when doing hair. I think having it be overblown doesn't read then as hair as much, where it should only be reflecting the lighting where it's curving to face, it has like the same angle facing the light. And then I like to break it up to imply that it's like multiple strands of hair. It's not like one clump of hair. So even like having one of these light pinks cutting over here can help imply hair as well. I would keep it more thick on the top. Something like that. So then if our bend is here, then you would also have a pretty strong light up here, because then that is the same angle that it's reflecting the light. So you got to be very aware of the angle that the light is coming from and where that would be reflected on the hair itself. And even see, it still feels too overblown here. I think that's why I like this area so much, because it doesn't feel like a white was used. It feels like a light pink. And I think that's why it feels the most like hair to me. And there's a lot of colors being incorporated in here. And that's fine. I think you just got to be aware, like there's an orange peeking here. There's some oranges here, and then there's like a yellow. I guess try to make sure that the colors you're including have a purpose rather than just throwing it. Like this yellow right here It just feels very strange. It's like a tan color almost. And I guess it feels more off, where I would make a new layer, make it a hue, or I'd actually make it a color layer, grab this pink, and I would just make that area pink.
5 minutes.
And even with some of that orange down there. Because with hair, I'd keep it more consistent of a color. And then if you want to like really amp up some of the color placements, then I would make like an overlay or something and have fun amping up the color. But including so many, then you enter more of a stylized range, and you have to be really careful because then it doesn't look so much real. And I think you're going for more of a slightly realistic look here. So you can see before and after with the hair. And I would just keep working and blending it. I think like, oops, having areas that are so rough edged, like down here, it doesn't work. So I'm just going to smooth it out. And with this base in place, then you could go in and like easily draw strands of hair over it. I really shouldn't be using with the chalk brush here. Let me use something like that. And then you could draw in these individual strands to really push home the idea that this is hair. Okay. The other two things I really wanted to talk about where you talked about is the fabric. Let me read what you wrote. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was for a different one. For this one, I actually think the fabric works well in the thickness that you used, but the level of render feels very inconsistent. So let me remove all the things I did and just talk about areas that are really tight and then areas that are very loose. So like this bow is super tight on the edging, the tattoo is super tight, and even areas on the hair, or like the Cheshire cat is very tight, but then like the elbow is very soft, or the fabric here is very soft, but then it's very tight again on the edge here. So, and when I say tight, I just mean like how clean the edges are versus being more like blurred or more textured on the edge. When doing things that are in focus, or if you're having different levels of focus, you want to keep it consistent and have it be from like a focal point and then have like levels of render out. So if like this was like everything in this spot was going to be heavily rendered, then everything in this area would be mostly rendered, and then this area would be more out of focus, and then the area on the very edge would be just like completely out of focus. With this, I feel like you did with the thorns, they are out of focus, and the door and the back are out of focus. But then with her, I think she should be almost mostly in focus, maybe like the edges a touch blurry, but having the Cheshire cat and like this tattoo be so in focus, and then the dress itself be not quite as tight, I think throws me off. And I would throw just more attention towards some of the elements like that, just so that it brings the level of render the same throughout. And let me pull up what I did again. Okay, the other thing, oops, there we go. The other thing was this area got lost for me. Before I lightened up the tattoo, if this was supposed to be like a similar color over here, I think this could have really separated out the body more. Something like that. And obviously you should still add in the texture, whatever it is that you were trying to create with the ground there. But you can see how much more it separates that background, the foreground element being our subject matter of Alice from the background. And it really creates that nice contrast there. Anywhere that you can add contrast, do it. Okay. Oh, there were two other things, not just one other thing. The first one was the light source. I really like the idea of what you're doing here, where it's like she's approaching this keyhole and it's kind of like where the glimmer of the light is coming from. But kind of like what I was talking about with the mist one, or the smoke one, like where is this front heavy light coming from and why is it there? If she is in this cavern, I would actually darken the whole piece, and then I would work with using that keyhole as kind of my light source and add rim lights throughout the entire piece and kind of play up that whole idea. Because then this creates an atmosphere. This creates like a feeling. And this is something that I really struggled with when I was in college because I was so worried on working with skin colors that were like purple or colors that weren't true to their matte color, their hue identity. But here you can see how it almost doesn't have that same feeling as it does here. And when you're going for an illustration, I think the driving home selling point is to really create a feeling when you look at it. And I already feel so much more enchanted by like this blue aura that's coming in from the background element, and it's being touched upon on the foreground elements. I do think, like what you said about there not being enough background elements, I agree. I think having something here would help out, or even like a rock. Like it doesn't have to be much, just something that implies more elements to it. And I didn't understand, at first, I didn't understand that this was a path. I actually thought it was like this crazy shadow creature that was coming from the doorway. The way that this path winds does not make sense in perspective, especially the way that she's standing. It almost should read more flat. And like if it was trying to curve around to her, like then it could get bigger as it comes down. But to have it get, that large, that fast, it really doesn't make sense with the curve that we have going on. So I would just focus on that, or I would even just get rid of the path altogether, especially if we're like in this cavern. Or I would have it just be more straightforward, like have it get to the point of where she's trying to walk to. And this also helps kind of direct the eye when we have lines like this that give more attention to the focal point of the piece, which I guess there's kind of two in this case. It's like the keyhole, because our eye is constantly being redirected to this high contrasted area over here, mixed with the interest of her and the character herself. All right, so that's what I would do to this piece. So that's just some tips there. All right, next one.
It's about 3:30.
Perfect. All right, we have the Egyptian Pharaoh by May, 3 of 4. And the questions were a lack of color harmony, the weird texture, snake scales, and a lack of a light source. And I agree with the questions that you have, or like the negative. I don't want to call it negative, but you're being critical of your piece, and I agree. Immediately, I thought this was King Tut when I first looked at it. It did not read as Cleopatra. And I think the selling point for me would have been if you did a exaggerated cat eye on the side with the makeup, but even that's kind of hidden with the eyes. So if you really want to make this read like a female, and in this case, more or less Cleopatra, I would have done something with the lip color, because right now it's reading very masculine, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, because you can have a more masculine looking Cleopatra. I just think if you really wanted this to read more as feminine, having elements that are recognizable as being feminine would help to be included here. Like even like lessening some of the wrinkles. Maybe even this jawline is a bit cut for a female. But like I said, a female can have a really sharp jawline, but if you wanted it to read as more female, this is just an easy way to push it. Because switching genders on a character is really, really easy. It just takes like a few facial feature adjustments. Like that. So you can see before and after how it's like her husband and then her. It's like the same person. Okay, so the question of the brush and making it look painterly, this doesn't feel painterly to me. It just feels more out of focus, or the level of quality isn't quite there. There's no area to focus on, because even with a painterly style, there's usually areas that are more crisp and more precise with your brush strokes. But here I feel like the entire thing has this brush textured look. And like there's areas where it's like a scribble, and then there's areas where they are more precise, but it's not consistent. So doing such a straight on headshot like this is awesome because the area of focus, at least the easiest way to do it, would be right in the center. And then the further out that you get, the less detail that you would have to put on because it would be out of focus. You can have it be more blurred out. So if I were you, I would go back and like really render out this face, and then maybe some of the elements around it give attention to. So like the gold here, I'd really try to make that look like gold. And then one of the snake edging, I would try to make it look like a snake scale. Admittedly, when I first looked at this, I didn't know that these were snakes. I thought these were like metal tubings or something sci-fi that was replicating snakes. But since there weren't any heads, I didn't actually get the impression that these were snakes. And I think that's what threw me off. So the other thing I would probably ask you to do is to render out one of the heads of the snakes and have it be closer to the area of focus so that it makes sense and you don't have like one area in focus for no reason. I would like to see some skin variation. I felt like it was very, here's the middle skin color. Let's add white for the areas in highlight, and let's add black for the areas in shadow. I think limiting your skin palette to just this is, it's limiting. That's what it is. And I would like to see more warm flesh tones and cool flesh tones seen here. Now, for your light source, you felt like you didn't have one, and I agree. I don't think there is a light source in this. I feel like there's trying to be a light source, and if that's the case, it would be coming from this side. Just on the way that these snakes are lit, that's what implies the lighting. But the face does not reflect that. I don't think this neck ornament reflects that either. What I would do is if these snakes are really like surrounding and wrapping around her head, then this neck should be more in shadow. And I would have that almost be all in shadow. And then even some of her face, maybe, like definitely her ears. And then there really wouldn't be much bounce lighting on this side happening. So you could almost have this side be almost all in shadow. And then the areas that are in light, really make sure you let that be known. And like, yeah, this area is in light. It's reflecting that strongly.
5 minutes.
Oh, really? Oh, nice. I have another 5 minutes on this. Okay. And then where there are like subtle highlights, and remember, don't go overboard with highlights, but just a touch. Actually, no, this is going to be the other part, whatever you want to call the little indent on top of your mouth. I remember I was taught so many different names, but essentially there's a little divot right here. And if you have the light be reflected and captured on this side and have this side more in shadow, that is like the easiest indication to tell where the light source is coming from, is like this mark above the lip. Because then immediately we know, okay, well, the light source is coming from this side because there's a shadow on that side of the dip. Now, I don't think you need to like highly over render it, because like what you said, I think you were going for more of a painterly look anyways, but I would detail it enough where you can tell what's going on. And if you really want the light source to be consistent, I would focus on that and really experiment on that, and don't even care about whether or not it looks painterly, but more or less focus on, does the lighting feel consistent and accurate? Okay, so this would be darker. So now the area in gold, gold itself, I don't like working with like a pure yellow and then going with black and white. I almost need the gold palette. I do not have that on me, but I like working with more oranges and warms, especially in areas that are closer to the light source like this. And the areas in shadow, I like to keep it more saturated and almost like a brown color. Let me go more down. Something around here. And have fun with your gold shadows. I think one of the tutorials that I really like about gold is talking about how they reflect. When it reflects onto itself, it'll get warmer and more saturated, but then shadows itself should be more warm. Gold is a warm color, and when you reflect it that way, the presence of gold is felt more, rather than when you just make it highlighted with white and added black for the shadow. And don't be afraid to go with the color pretty close to white when you're doing a metal type rendering.
2 minutes.
And the girl I mentioned earlier, Nubia, she was like a queen of doing metal textures. And her biggest advice to me was contrast, with laying heavy, dark values of whatever material you're working with against the white part of the reflectiveness. And it creates that illusion of that metal. And always use reference. Like right now, I probably should be using reference because this could be better. But the idea is there. Let me see before and after. Yeah, where like gold, it feels more like gold. There's a warmth to it that wasn't there before. Now for the snakes, I would definitely render out a head, but I don't really understand what's going on with the wrapping of this light color, because if this yellow was kind of supposed to represent where the light is coming from, it's like also trying to be representative of the skin pattern of the, or not the skin pattern, the pattern of the snake. And it throws me off, because if I were you, I would choose one or the other. Like if this white, this like green color is supposed to be the light, then I would make the pattern color different or just darker, because having it be the exact same is kind of confusing. And I think that's where it might be throwing you off too. And try to render out one of them. Let me see if there's any other area I wanted to talk about. Oh, and then what?
You got about 30 seconds.
Okay, really quick, I'm going to make a multiply layer. And if you did render out this area down here better, then you can lay on a pretty heavy shadow that would be implied from the snake that was in front of it. And you can see how immediately it adds depth. And this also tells where the light is coming from. Having a bunch of hints like this and like above the mouth area, or even like having the neck completely in shadow, that all implies the light source. And the more that you have those, the easier it will be for the viewer to distinguish what is the light source and where is it coming from. Because most of the times it's off of the composition and the canvas itself. So you have to work with how it's falling on the subject matter to explain where the light source is coming from. Or even like this hat up here, having it super heavy in shadow on one side and not on that side, or like on her cloth, and it would be more in shadow on this side, but then on this side, oops, it would be in light. All things like that. So let me do a final before and after. So you can see how it's starting to take form, and then we would just continue on that path. Okay, we're on our very last one. And this one is, I named it Yellow Girl by I Am Not. And they didn't really have a question so much as a statement that they didn't want, or they wanted low contrast. And even receiving this, there's a lot that I like. I think it's a little too simplified for what I would personally want in a human form, but I think a lot of this works really well. Now, with that in mind, with this like very stylized character, it's not so much focusing on like the anatomy is wrong, but it's making sure that the anatomy fits the style that we have presented in front of us. Now, I really like the head. I think everything in the facial region works very well. I think it's in proportion. I like the way that you did the iris with it being more sunken in on this side because it's on the further side of the head. all these little indication marks of like the subtle variation of color works very well. And I kind of want to see that implemented everywhere else, because I feel like there's a lot of attention and focus here, and it's really exciting and interesting. But then I feel like with the hands, I feel like it's lost a bit. And even with the legs just feel very there's not much to them. And I think you could pull in the same level of attention down there and really have a solid character. Now I'm gonna say what I've said a few times in this stream is I feel like these hands are exactly what I'm talking about with hiding. And even the one that is seen, I feel like isn't done in a proportional manner. It feels almost like a blobbish shape to me. And I think an easy way of fixing that would be just to like give more impression of the knuckle line on the edge. Even that feels more like a hand than that. And then having the other hand completely hidden, I think is kind of a cop out. And I'm trying to say this to everyone here because it's not only me that thinks this, but like everyone in the industry that I talk to about hands. And we always joke about how we all do it. We all hide hands at one point in our artist career because it shows, well, one, we're not confident in showing our hands and our level of accuracy and making sure that they look good. So instead we put them in pockets or we do things that hide them. So even if you wanted to have this kind of hands folded on top of each other, I would place them in the front then and really show like the finger placement and do some nice variations of it, where I feel like completely hiding one is too safe. Okay, in the area where the dress meets the hair, it creates this blended mode where I can't really tell where one ends and one begins. And with such a stylized look, you can take liberties of adding contrast. So in this case, I added in a lighter color to just edge out the dress and show where the hair begins. You can see how easy it is now to distinguish where one end and one begins, and it's not getting lost. There are times where letting the line get lost, I think, works, but I think with this one, it just feels too melted into each other. And it's not even like we're separating it that much if you want to turn the opacity down even. Like just separating it out a touch where it's not like hard to distinguish, especially for such a clean style like this. That was the one area that I felt wasn't too easy to distinguish. The second thing with the skin is I feel like the hues and the tones that were used on the upper half are wonderful, and I don't think those were incorporated down here. Because if you look back and forth, like you can see the pinks and the warmer colors being incorporated, and then none of that is down here. It's very much, you know, I'll just color pick to better show you. So area in light, and the area in shadow. And then up here, base would be like here, area in light, and area in shadow.
I guess my question is, are they supposed to be nylons?
They are. I don't feel it, especially since like the toes, like I feel like there would be some indication. But I think that was more of a mistake. If they are supposed to be nylons, then I would make it a little more distinguishable, because right now it feels like just the skin hues are too separate. But I think the legs themselves, I think, was the one area that I had the most like, I wonder why they did that, because the rest of it, I felt like it really fit this nice style. And then as I looked down, it just felt rushed, or like they weren't given enough care. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about with this one was the ruffles. Okay, with doing ruffles, I think you'd have a great start here, but I think some of it gets lost in the lighting where it would match up here. Having it melt into ruffles is this cool effect, but then your shadows have to like really match up with that, and even your lighting. And then having this one that dips lower, it's okay. It doesn't fit with the pattern of the rest of the dress. It almost feels like it's melting right here, where if this was a dress, it should come up. It would fit that consistent bounce that you have going on before. And then just having this weird dip here, it would almost read more flat. Like you wouldn't even need more shading because of how little of a dip it is. But if you dip it more like this, then you could have that shadow there and here, and then let more of that fruffle be seen underneath. And then this wouldn't be extended as down. So you can see how this almost fits the pattern that you've created. And it just feels more symmetrical, as if the dress itself had shape, like an initial shape to it. It almost reads like a bell to me. And everything about this character actually reads like a bell to me. And I love that. I think this is a very strong design that you have going on here. I just think the legs could be reworked. 'Cause even without them, like I feel like if you take in the same proportions and the way that you did the arms up here and laid them down, if you still want to be thick, that's fine. It's not the thickness that bothers me. It was the execution. Or if they are supposed to be the nylon, like what Joe was saying, I would just emphasize that more. Because right now it doesn't feel like nylon to me.
2 minutes, and I'm not said. The idea is that she has stockings on.
Okay. So if she has stockings on, I'm going to Google this just in case. I'm not sure how they would reflect lighting as much.
They're actually kind of highly reflective.
All right, so when I pull in like I guess I shouldn't have used black. Hold on, let me grab another.
Yeah, grab a skin tone one.
I'm trying to find one that's not like sexy.
What are you searching? I would just type in skin tone.
I think this works. Okay. Let me get rid of that black. All right, so if she's supposed to be wearing stockings, I think the biggest giveaway for me is why it didn't look like stockings is the feet. If you look at the stockings on here, you can see how it becomes this darker value because of the way that the material is bunching up, and especially around like the edge of the toes. I feel like it was started maybe, like really focus that up. And I would actually just make it darker. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna just grab the colors here. And also I really like the bounce that you have going on the ground. It's like this alchemy effect. It definitely creates an interesting character. Like I'm intrigued by who is this character. Let me grab, oops, inverse that selection.
That's time.
Okay. Let me get this photo out of the way. Okay, so it doesn't have to be that dark if you don't want it to be too dark, but I think this is so close for me that I wasn't even able to distinguish it. But if you just darken it up a touch, like now I can tell, okay, there's a clear distinction between the skin tone and the legs here. So she's probably wearing a stocking. And I would, even though this is stylized, even somewhat of an indication mark of an elbow, you know what, that could just be more personal preference, but even like just a little sliver, something here that kind of denotes an elbow, And I think the same could be said for down here, just something that could showcase a knee. You know what? I think for your style, I can understand why there isn't indication marks. Then I would just focus on making sure that these shapes feel like the style that you're going for. And yeah. I think I'm more intrigued by the style that you have going on here. All right, and that's it. So that was all 9 of our user submitted images critiques. Critique. It was these 9. And I hope you guys may have picked up something from this. I know these are very long-winded for me to do. And I do think they're beneficial, and that's why I will continue doing them. And we will do them once every season. So if yours didn't get submitted this time, or yours didn't get picked this time, just know we'll do another one in the spring. And I'm trying to think if there's any. Yes. So we have the perspective course coming out very, very soon. If that is something that intrigues you, stay tuned. It'll most likely be out tomorrow, but we'll give you updates just in case something happens. And then we have a very exciting game asset course coming out in 2 weeks, and that's where we go from concept to Blender. So you learn how to draw something, model it in Blender, and then take it into a game engine in Unity. So that is what's coming up at cgcookie. And I know that you guys probably have a lot of questions going on here, but just know that this one was more of just like me jabbing the entire time. And next week I'll do more of a fun one, and we'll answer questions. I think I'm going to do the promo image for the candy cane night contest that is happening in January. So I might do like a shield made out of peppermint swirl or something. It'll be something where I can answer more of your questions. So I want to thank you guys for coming to this live stream, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Joe, do you have any last minute?
No, I don't think so.
All right. All right. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.